Welcome to the Test Guild Automation Podcast, where we all get together to learn more about automation and software testing, with your host, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Today we'll be talking with Paul Grossman, the Doc Arts wizard, all about automation and what has become a tradition here at the Test Guild for our Halloween special. If you don't know, Paul has been delivering hybrid test automation framework solutions for 2 decades using UFT, Selenium, WebDriver IO, and he's a big fan now of a newer tool called Test Rigger. He currently now is the lead quality assurance engineer for Guarantee Rate, Go White Sox, and he continues to speak at conferences around the globe, virtually, and before it was all online, on site as well. So he's always doing a live demo, and he most recently was the game master of the 2021 Bug Bash hosted by the British Computer Society with his sandbox website called Candy Mapper. You don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. The Test Guild Automation Podcast is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs. Their cloud-based test platform helps ensure your favorite mobile apps and websites work flawlessly on every browser, operating system, and device. Get a free trial. Visit testguild.com/Sauce Labs and click on the exclusive sponsor section to try it for free for 14 days. Check it out. Hey, Paul, welcome back to the Guild.
Oh, the music. I love it. Totally sets the mood for the Halloween episode. And by the way, I love your costume, that kind of superhero one that you've got on there with the yellow cape and everything. Great design.
Awesome. Good to have you back, Paul. So I'm just curious to know, was there anything I missed in your bio that you want the Guild to know more about? It's been a while since the last time we spoke. I think probably the last Halloween special.
Yeah, it's been a year. I've changed jobs. I'm actually now working for Guaranteed Rate. Go Sox. Go Sox. Well, I hope I'm working tomorrow. I'm working over at Guaranteed Rate, and I've changed languages actually. I worked with UFT for about 16 years. That's VBScript. Then I jumped over to Java with Selenium, and now I'm working with 2 tools. One of which is JavaScript using WebDriver IO, and then there's this other one that's kind of a plain English automation tool that we can talk about a little later on in the episode.
Nice. So I thought they killed VBScript off years ago.
No, they still have it. They have UFT. I think it's a developer, and there's UFT. There's 2 different flavors. So one's the original one that everyone kind of knows and loves. That's the combination of QTP and Service Test. And then they have UFT Developer, which is working in a bunch of different other languages, and also you get to use your favorite if you're working in Eclipse or IntelliJ, Visual Studio. You get to use that IDE in order to do some stuff. Very similar in designs and the element locations on those tools.
Nice. So I think one thing when people hear about tools like UFT, and especially now, even more now, so when they hear things of low code, no code type solutions, they start screaming, and they sends a lot of chill down their spines because they're like, low code solution, does that even make sense? That's kind of scary. Should I be afraid? So what do you think about low code solutions or no code solutions? Is it just a term, or is it actually something, we started 20 years ago? Is it something that's actually viable now?
Oh, it's actually viable. It's actually become really useful because it optimizes time for us. First of all, when you're working in a no-code or low-code tool, you don't necessarily need to learn an arcane, complex language like Java or JavaScript or Python or Ruby. You can generally write that stuff in something very close to plain English. So if I want to go and click on a Add to Cart button, you just say click the Add to Cart button, and then internally it says I'm going to go find an element that has a descriptor that has Add to Cart in it. And we'll go click on it, and if it can't quite figure it out, it does a little other tricks to try and reduce your maintenance time. So, and this is stuff that this isn't necessarily new, as you said. 20 years. I've been working on doing something I call the Magic Object Model in my frameworks for about 6 years, where I will, let the user write the code that says, let's go click on an element. And if it can't find the descriptor, we did this famously in UFT. If it can't find the element, the locator that is supposed to be on the page, because maybe, let's say, the class has changed. It used to be a link the last time we ran and everything went great, and now it's a button. We could dynamically create an element and say, okay, just go find a button with that text in it and see if we can find it. And I say famously because I do talk about this. It was about 4 years ago where we had 50 elements changed in our UFT object repository. We had a lot of copy paste stuff. So for every element, there was like 4 lines of code we had to go and change. So that's about 200 lines of code, 50 elements, probably 2 days worth of work to do that. And I threw in this code that just said, okay, let's go find another element similar to it. And we got about 97 of 100 elements fixed in about 2 hours. And the framework was really solid.
Nice. So how's that different though? Like Windrunner had an object repository map or an object map, and UFT had the same thing. So if an element changed, you just go in the map and you change it. They also had like keyword views where you do a drop down. You like how are these newer tools different than those the ones that set the stage back in the day?
Well, they still do have that drop down where you drag stuff in, and a lot of tools do actually have that interface. What we've got today is we've got the ability to just write out in plain English, and I know we'd probably get at this point talk a little bit about everybody's talking about, as you're talking about Cucumber and Gherkin, stuff like that, but we're actually looking at expanding it out, not even being limited down to I have to write this word given when then, and then I have to write out some sort of extrapolated layer that says, okay, given I click on this button and now I got to add all that. Just letting the tool actually identify what your intention is. I want to go click on something, or verify the page contains, and just write in plain English. No more data driven, no more data. I know I had a bunch of Excel sheets that had descriptors and other methods that I was trying to support. All of it's more condensed, and it does take a lot less time in order to run, I should say, write and run test cases like that. So yeah, the new tools are basically condensing down our time and making it a lot more easier. It also gives leverages our manual testers to kind of get into like a gray area, and in between. They're not quite an SDET, but they're no longer a manual tester. There's something in between, and giving really good help to getting regression testing done very quickly for the team.
So I think one thing that might creep people out is they fall in love with tools. And so someone may love UFT, some love Selenium. Do these type of solutions, you think, are going to replace these longstanding tools or industry standards that we have now?
No. We've got way too much invested in those code development tools. In fact, it's very similar to what I'm having 20 years ago when I first became an automation engineer. I scared the heck out of my manual testers. They weren't my friends anymore. They thought I was trying to get them out of a job. The quick solution to that was I wrote a script that clicked a button. We call it the NFG test, the new freaking guy test. And while everybody went to lunch, he had hit the button for an hour. I automated that, and then we all went to lunch together. We all became good friends. In this case, when we're looking at low-code, no-code tools, what it scares now is the SDETs, because they think, oh, I'm going to be automated by a tool that's so easy, they don't need my techniques, which is simply not the case. What I'm looking at is trying to do some, I guess I call it Venn diagram automation. We have 2 tools, one that has the SDETs developing in whatever tools they happen to be using, UFT or WebDriver IO or whatever their flavor is, and then we're complementing it with low-code tools that allow our manual testers to get up to speed very quickly. So if you're SDET, don't worry, you're still secure. We still need you. Embrace the whole thing and make it a whole big happy family. And we're going to get to where we need to very quickly when it's combined like that.
Do you find that causes more complexity, though? A lot of times people are like, oh, we have one tool, one solution that everyone uses, and we only need to maintain one framework. But now if you have multiple frameworks, multiple people doing different kinds of testing, how do you pull it all together and make sure that it doesn't give you chills at night?
Well, one way you can do that is make sure that if you're taking two tools, and by the way, I understand some people are sitting there thinking, oh, great, we're great. I'm going to have 3, 4, 5 tools. I have a limit of 2 tools that I work with to balance that out. And the important thing is that they both are able to report to the same central reporting location. So if we're reporting out to what's our most popular reporting tool these days?
Jira?
Yeah, if we're going out to Jira, then both tools should be reporting to Jira. And then at the top level, everyone's looking at it, and it doesn't all look all that different. They both are generating screen captures. Both are putting out information as to what's being failed, and everybody just gets an email that says, "Okay, check this out. Something's changed from this from the last run to the current run." And I don't think it really matters which tool that you're using in order to get that at that level.
Cool. So, being in the Halloween special, any horror stories you could share around these tools or your experience with tools? I know you said you gave one example of how a team didn't like you because you were the automation guy. So, any other horror stories like that?
No horror stories as far as people being scared of that. I think I've taken care of that. I've got some really great people I'm working with at Guaranteed Rate, and they're very open to options. I do have one current horror story that's going on, and it is with WebDriver IO. There was a project out there called Fibers. And the understanding I have is that Fibers was kind of syntactic sugar in order to reduce the amount of promises that we're writing, or a sync and awaits, and basically eliminates that. Your method would say, I'm going to do a sync, and then you have to await every element. The idea behind this, as I understand, is, when you're working in JavaScript and people haven't worked in it, they may not get this, and I had to learn the lesson real quick. Because the way the design of JavaScript is, when you're building a framework, you want to have multiple things coming up at the same time. The same idea kind of gets into automation. Let's try and execute every line of code at the same time. Like, let's click the submit button and then put in the username and the password. Yeah, you got a race condition there and it won't work. So what async and await does is says, okay, keep everything in a sequential order. The horror story is that Fibers, which did all that magic, basically the project, as far as I can tell, has died. WebDriver IO has mentioned that, and they said we can't use what they call the sync method in there to kind of take care of that all stuff in the background, so you have to go and put everything back, put in asyncs and awaits. I've been spending a couple of weeks basically touching about every other line of code that I've written in the last 3 months to get this thing to work and work well. I was hoping that they would be able to find some better solutions so I wouldn't have to touch everything. But that's my current horror story. But I'm past that now. But I do want to let everybody know that that's one thing. Do learn about async and await and embrace it as you're going forward if you're on a WebDriver project, WebDriver IO project.
So what's the key takeaway from there? So you wouldn't have to perform an exorcism in the future. Would you avoid fancy functionality that may not be
that's
native to the tool?
That's interesting. It's a good lead into alternative tools like low code tools, where all of that has been handled inside of the framework internally, and you don't get to see or experience all that horror. It's the guys who develop the tools that have to deal with that quite a bit. So that's one of the advantages I see, is that I don't have to, if I'm working with a tool, let's say, recently I've been working with TestRigger, that's all handled behind the scenes. I don't even think there's any integration with Fibers and the sync awaits. I'm not privy to the background on how Artem Golev does that, but I don't have to deal with that sort of level of stuff. I also don't have to extrapolate a whole nother layer of automation goodness in order to support what kind of business process I'm doing. We can describe them out in plain English, and then one of the other cool things about low-code tools is people say, if there's a record tool that's in there, then you got record and playback, and nobody likes that. And I agree. You don't want to build your test cases with record and playback, but you do want to use a record tool in order to learn the syntax, learn how things are built, and how the tool is used. In a tool like TestRigger, what they've got is something called reusable rules. And it's basically modular design. You're making a business component, and the component says, okay, put in the username, the password, and click on login. And if any of that particular component changes, that's used by 100 test cases, you have one singular place that you make that change. We all do that exact same thing in coding, whether we're working in UFT or WebDriver IO or whatever other tools. It's just a good thing that we learn as developers. And we kind of just have to bring that idea over to manual testers, and they understand, and they can make their test cases fairly quick and robust.
So it seems like a lot of these newer tools really they reanimated older functionality from Mercury almost, because they had business process testing. They had these components, and you change one component, it would update everything. But the thing was slow. So are the newer tools, do they do it better? Is it different? Is it using AI or, another buzzword, machine learning behind the scenes to help, where maybe those tools that were the forerunners maybe didn't live up to the hype?
They are using AI in there. In fact, there's one of the things that I really like. There's another tool I wanted to give a shout out to, which is Applitools Eyes. We've talked about for years, every tool out there has some sort of way of doing visual identification and images. And from my personal opinion, almost every tool, it's been a sales pitch. It's like, hey, we can do this. Well, we don't do it really great, but we can do this. Applitool Eyes is basically the only tool out there that has really nailed it down. Angie Jones has a wonderful demonstration on her tool, on her team out there, to show exactly how that works. And it's something that's really come full circle and really been robust. The same thing with low code tools. It used to be, okay, it's an interesting little thing, but it's hard to do. I think today we're really at the point where we can really leverage it really well.
So, Paul, you've mentioned a few tools. One was WebDriver IO, which uses JavaScript. You mentioned UFT, which uses VBScript. So is there anything, what kind of, hocus pocus are you doing to switch from one tool to the other? And how hard is it to switch between tools? I know you use tools that also use Java in the background. I know when people hear it, I learned VBScript, they laugh. But I think there's a lot of, you can move from language to language once you learn one to the other. It's just a matter of just learning the syntax differences. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will say I'm the only guy out there who brags that I made my mortgage payment for 16 years working in BASIC that I learned in the 80s back in college. And I also sometimes will poke a bear every once in a while when a developer, I'll say, I'd like to try and get something done. And then the developer will say, well, I don't think we can do that in Java. I'm like, well, I just did it here in BASIC. So if you tell me there's something that Java can't do that BASIC does, and then they get mad and they go off and do it just out of spite. There, it does work. I figured it out.
Stop howling.
All right. Let's see. What? To get back to your point, I'm trying to think of your question and try and see a better way of answering that.
What's up with Java frameworks? A lot of people are like, Java's too complex. You should use JavaScript. It's the same thing. Choosing what language to use, when to use it.
Well, one of the things I do talk about is that you don't necessarily have to select Java as your programming language, and sometimes it's selected for the wrong reason. And the reason is that it's the idea of, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you only have Java developers and you ask them what language should we do our automation in, they say, I'll do it in Java because once it falls to us, we'll be able to handle it. But that's really kind of a fallacy. I have no intention of having my SDATs let the project fall to the developers, because they don't have time to take care of all of that anyway. You ask them how much unit testing have they done. Oh yeah, we did a ton. So why would it go to them? The idea is that it really doesn't matter what language you program in, but consider using a language that's easier, that doesn't have such a large footprint as Java, because as SDATs every day we are going to be spending either our time writing test cases or debugging and extending our framework. Why use a language that has so many more characters and so many more intricacies to build and spend your time doing that rather than building more test cases? I don't see the advantage of that. So I do recommend look at different languages that are available out there. Java just isn't the only thing that's out there. Selenium supports, I think, 6 different languages at least out there. So do consider that.
It's a good point, Paul. A lot of things that people always say, oh, you have to use the same language as your developers. I don't necessarily agree with that. Another thing I think people kind of get creepy about is that they think they need to use a tool specific to the technology that's being used to develop the application, say, like React. So I need to use a tool that is built for React. Is that the case? How have you found in your experience when choosing a tool? Does it always have to match with the architecture that's being used to develop the application? Does it matter? Is it like a language? You use which one is best for your team? How does that work?
Yeah, well, you definitely need to take a look at tools that are going to support multiple architectures, because along the way, someone's going to make a decision, say, I don't like React. Let's go with Vue. Let's change over the closure. You have to be a little bit more open to understanding, like, okay, let's just the worst case scenario, the whole underlying architecture changes. How much is that going to affect my automation framework? And that's another good thing where low-code tools come in handy, and I do recommend anyone go out there and go and check out a test, a tool that you're looking at for a POC against websites that design in React and Vue and have front ends or enclosure or whatever else other architectures that's coming along. And just test it. See if you can write a script, in just a couple of minutes to see does it work under each different architecture that's out there. I've done that with TestRigger. I've run it up against Vue. I've run it up against the architectures that you just mentioned. And there is a website out there which I will get shortly. We'll include in the show notes that actually has samples out there. I know a lot of people like to use the Heroku, the internet, which is okay, but there is another website out there that will actually have samples of buttons and radio buttons and stuff and tables, which is really cool, that will you can actually test against with your automation tool, just to be sure you know how much pain you're going to have should the underlying architecture just completely change underneath you.
Is this your Candy Mapper application?
Oh, Candy Mapper is actually just a sandbox out there that that is used for, to see if you test your own skills. There are 2 versions. There's CandyMapper.com and there's CandyMapper R2, release 2. CandyMapper R2, which is the website goes right, and then CandyMapper is the website that goes wrong. All sorts of weird, unconnected stuff. It's more like reality. How can you actually pick up that a link doesn't take you to where you think the link is going to go? So what I overdo is I'll go to Telerik.com. They have front-end elements that you can sample. And I like going in there and just jumping into all sorts of different stuff. They've got a Kendo React button and a bunch of other different applications that they interact with, such as jQuery, Angular, React, Vue. And I take TestRigger, and I've been running against all those different flavors. It doesn't matter. It likes them all, and it interacts with them in the same way. I don't have to change anything in my scripts.
So, Paul, one thing we haven't addressed is the boogeyman or the grim reaper in the room, and that is paid solutions. It seems like a lot of these no-code, low-code are paid solutions, and a lot of people always, I only do open source, and because it's free, and therefore I save my company tons of money. Is this the case, or is this just some sort of undead type thinking?
I think when you're looking at open source, you might be spending money elsewhere on that. Yeah, you might be saving money on the tools that they're open source, but one thing I do warn people about is that you might be depending on the kindness of strangers for your support. Since there's really no money coming into an open source tool, nobody's getting paid all that much. So if there's something that needs to be fixed, well, you don't know where in the layer of that the developer is going to decide, am I going to fix it this afternoon or am I going to fix it next year? When you have paid tools, I mean, they don't want to lose the revenue income stream, so they're going to bend over backwards to try and make sure the tool is useful for you. On the other hand, the other thing is that if you're using open source tools and you have to work in Java, you may be taking more time in order to extend out and write your language, write your scripts and debug that. And, that's it's slower going than if you've got something, like I said, UFT, we know that's a paid tool, but the language is so much easier that you're going to save money on the far end, where you're not spending, having an SDET spend a whole large amount of time to create your scripts, and because the language footprint itself is so much smaller on that. And I'm sure there's a lot of other time savings involved in that, but those are the two major ones.
Absolutely. And Paul, you mentioned TestRigger a few times. And I talked to you in the pre-show. You don't work for TestRigger. You don't get a dime from TestRigger.
I don't.
So just curious to know, what is the deal with TestRigger? What kind of tricks and treats does it give you that you're so jacked up about, like you're on sugar or candy high that you're always talking about it?
Well, I may have mentioned in our last broadcast that I became convinced that it was a good tool in what it was attempting to do, mostly because I've been trying to do this magic object model stuff for about 5 years. I sat down with Artem in 17 minutes, and I said, here's my Candy Mapper website. Follow the 10 steps on there. Just go navigate through and validate a error and invalidate a success. And it took me 17 minutes to write the script. It ran. I had maybe about 2 minutes of help from Artem saying, write this word here, put that one there. Aside from that, I'm like, I've never written a script that quickly to do that. I've also been using it for a little bit of fun. Hopefully this will pay off someday. I'm looking at it as also like robotic process automation. So for us in the United States here, and I'm sure you've got people outside that are in other countries, but we've got Wheel of Fortune out here. And if you happen to watch Wheel of Fortune, you can become a wheel watcher. You get yourself a wheel watcher number. And on some of their broadcasts, they will put up a number saying, hey, you got 24 hours to match this number. But not everybody watches Wheel of Fortune every day. But I'm using TestRigger to go and log in as myself and check to see if the words you are not a winner does not appear on the screen. And if it doesn't, it sends me a message. So I'm hoping one of these days that I will get a message that says, go log in and go collect your $24,000 that is being matched by Wheel of Fortune and Pat Sajak and Vanna White. The odds are highly against it, but it's still a cool thing to have out there. One of the major points of that is that I wrote it just over a year ago, and I've never had to make a change on it. It still sends me a message every day at about 6 o'clock saying, no, you still didn't win. I haven't had to change anything, even though I'm pretty sure their underlying architecture of their website probably has changed over the last year.
Cool. Okay, Paul, before we go, is there one piece of actual advice you can give to someone to help them avoid any creepiness with their automation testing efforts? What's the best way to find our contact?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I got a lot of advice. So for our JavaScript people who are working with WebDriver IO, use the term use strict. It's a very best practice. It forces you to declare all your variables very much the way that Java people would do, and they say that's a good idea. If you're working in VBScript, it's called option explicit. It helped a whole lot on that. For WebDriver IO, get used to async await. We kind of mentioned that earlier in the podcast. For Selenium, Java is really big and complex language. You could always choose one that's got a smaller footprint. And I mentioned Applitools is the only game in town for automated image validation. Go check them out. They're fantastic. And finally, be sure to know who the client is and do what's necessary to keep them happy. The trick is we're not always sure who the client is. My opinion is I'm the client because I'm the one using the tool, extending the framework, and debugging it and analyzing those results every day. So I write for myself. If my boss, Dan, happens to be listening to this podcast and he asks who's the client, he's the client. So that's basically the best idea is write for yourself, write to support your framework, and in the end, it just makes everybody happy. You mentioned where you can get a hold of me. So here's a couple places. If you're looking for me on Twitter, I am Dark Arts Wizard up on Twitter. If you want to see some of my videos, go over to YouTube and just type in Paul Grossman, the Dark Arts Wizard. That URL will get you to all my cool videos and a ton of other tools that I work with. If you want to email me, I'm thedarkartswizard@gmail.com. And I think that's all the communications ways that you can get a hold of me, aside from my phone. I'm not going to give that out.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything in Valley we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A371. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try for Free Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.